Spring, 1919. New Orleans faced a choice that sounded like a fever dream. Play jazz or die. A serial killer was stalking the French Quarter, but he didn't just want blood. He wanted a performance. The letter he sent to the city would spark the strangest night in American history. March 13th, 1919. The people of New Orleans woke up to find a letter published in their morning newspapers, a letter that would change their city forever. It wasn't from a politician. It wasn't a business advertisement. It was from a killer who called himself the Axeman. Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans, they have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. The letter went on and on, rambling about being a fallen angel, about enjoying killing, about his superiority over the police who couldn't catch him. But then, the letter took a strange turn, an ultimatum that would grip the city in terror. Now, to be exact, at 12:15, earthly time, next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. The message was clear. Play jazz music on Tuesday night, March 19th, or die. Most people would dismiss this as a hoax, a sick joke, the ravings of some madman seeking attention. But the people of New Orleans knew better, because by the time this letter was published, the Axeman had already killed 6 people, and he was just getting started. To understand the terror that gripped New Orleans in 1919, we need to go back to May 23rd, 1918. Joseph Momfre was a barber who lived with his wife, Catherine, in the apartment above their grocery store in the lower 9th Ward. He was a respected member of the Italian community, hard-working, quiet, no enemies that anyone knew of. On the morning of May 23rd, Joseph's brothers arrived at the store for their regular visit. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. Something was wrong. They forced the door open, and what they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Joseph and Catherine Momfre were dead. Their throats had been slashed. Their heads had been struck repeatedly with an axe. Police investigators discovered something chilling. The killer hadn't broken in through the front door. He had chiseled out a panel in the back door, just large enough to reach through and unlock it from the inside. And the murder weapon? Joseph's own axe, taken from his shed, used against him, then left behind, covered in blood. But here's what made it truly bizarre. Nothing was stolen. Money was left untouched. Jewelry remained in plain sight. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. The New Orleans Police Department had no leads, no suspects, no motive. They chalked it up to a random act of violence, a horrible tragedy. They were wrong. June 27th, 1918, just over a month later, Louis Bessemer, a Polish immigrant who ran a small grocery, was attacked in his sleep. His partner Harriet Lowe was attacked alongside him. Same method. Panel chiseled out of the door. The victim's own axe used against them. Brutal blows to the head. But this time, they survived. Barely. When police arrived, Louis was conscious enough to speak. They asked him who did this. His answer made no sense. According to contemporary police reports, Louis mumbled something about a white man, or maybe multiple men. His story kept changing. He was confused, traumatized. The head injuries made his testimony unreliable. Harriet never regained full consciousness. She died weeks later from her injuries, but not before telling nurses that Louis himself had attacked her. The case was a mess. Police briefly suspected Louis, but the evidence didn't fit. Besides, he nearly died himself. And then someone noticed something. The method. The chiseled door panel. The victim's own axe. This was the same as the Maggio murders. August 5th, 1918. Sisters Anna and Mary Schneider were attacked in their sleep. Same method. Door panel chiseled. Axe attack. Both survived but were severely injured. Neither saw their attacker. August 10th, 1918. Just 5 days later, Joseph Romano, a barber, was attacked. His nieces, sleeping in another room, heard strange sounds. They found their uncle bleeding, skull fractured from axe blows. Joseph died 2 days later. But before he died, he told police what he saw. According to witness testimony, he described a white male, average height, wore a dark suit. That was all he could remember before losing consciousness. By late summer of 1918, New Orleans was gripped by fear. 4 attacks in 3 months, 6 victims, 4 dead, 2 barely alive. The pattern was clear. Italian grocers and barbers, living in working-class neighborhoods, attacked in their sleep, always with their own axes. The police had theories. Maybe it was a vendetta against Italian immigrants. Maybe it was organized crime. The Black Hand extortion rackets were active in New Orleans, but none of it quite fit. Extortionists don't leave money behind. They don't use the victim's own weapons, and they certainly don't attack random families with no warning. Then, as suddenly as they started, the attacks stopped. Months passed. No new incidents. People began to relax. Maybe the killer had left town. Maybe he'd been scared off. Maybe it was over. It wasn't over. March 10th, 1919, nearly 7 months after the last attack. Charles Cortimiglia, a grocer, lived with his wife Rosie and their infant daughter Mary in a small apartment behind their store. At 2:30 a.m., Rosie woke to the sound of splintering wood. Before she could scream, a dark figure entered their bedroom. The moonlight caught the blade of an axe. What happened next was described in Rosie's testimony to police. The attacker moved with terrifying speed. Charles was struck first. Then Rosie threw herself over her baby, trying to protect her. The axe came down, again and again. Neighbors heard the screams. They found Charles unconscious, skull fractured, Rosie severely injured, bleeding from multiple head wounds, and baby Mary. 2-year-old Mary Cortimiglia was dead. This changed everything. Up until now, the Axeman had primarily targeted adults, but now, a child was dead. New Orleans erupted in panic. If children weren't safe, no one was safe. And that's when the letter arrived. 3 days later, March 13th, 1919. The letter that promised he would strike again on March 19th, unless the city played jazz. Police initially tried to suppress the letter. They didn't want to cause more panic. But someone at the Times-Picayune decided the public had a right to know. The letter was published in full, and New Orleans collectively lost its mind. A supernatural serial killer demanding they play jazz or die. Some people dismissed it as a hoax. The police publicly stated it was probably a copycat, trying to scare people. But most people weren't taking chances. Music stores sold out of jazz records. Piano teachers were overwhelmed with requests for urgent lessons. Bands were hired for private parties at unprecedented rates. March 19th, 1919, the night the Axeman promised to spare those who played jazz. As darkness fell, something extraordinary happened. New Orleans began to play, in mansions and tenements, in fancy clubs and humble homes, rich and poor, black and white, Italian, Irish, French, everyone. Those who couldn't afford records opened their windows and played music on phonographs as loud as possible. Those who couldn't play instruments sang. Those who couldn't sing turned their radios to jazz stations and cranked the volume. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe the city as one enormous jazz concert. The police were out in force, patrolling every neighborhood, waiting for the Axeman to strike. Midnight came, 12:15 a.m., the exact time the Axeman had specified. The jazz played on. 12:30 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Dawn broke. The sun rose over New Orleans. No one had been attacked. The Axeman had kept his word. Or had he simply been entertained by watching an entire city dance to his tune? The relief was short-lived. August 10th, 1919. Exactly 1 year after the Joseph Romano murder, Sarah Lauman, a woman living alone, was attacked in her sleep. Same method. Door panel, axe, brutal head wounds. Sarah survived, but like the others, she never saw her attacker clearly. September 2nd, 1919. Mike Pepitone, a grocer, was killed in his bed. His wife in the next room heard the attack. She rushed in to find a dark figure fleeing through a window. Mike died within moments. He was the Axeman's final confirmed victim. The New Orleans Police Department was desperate. They had been investigating for over a year and had virtually nothing. No clear motive, no definitive witnesses, no physical evidence linking the crimes beyond the similar methodology. They tried everything. Surveillance of Italian neighborhoods, stakeouts of grocery stores. They even consulted with detectives from other cities who had experience with serial killers. Some investigators theorized it was a single killer with a grudge against Italian immigrants. Others believed it might be multiple copycats. A few even wondered if the supernatural claims in the letter had merit. There were numerous suspects over the months of investigation. According to police records, they investigated Joseph Momfre, a career criminal with a grudge against several of the victims' families. But his whereabouts during some attacks couldn't be verified. Every lead went cold. Then something strange happened. In December 1919, Mike Pepitone's widow, Esther, traveled to Los Angeles. On December 2nd, she walked up to a man named Joseph Momfre on a Los Angeles street and shot him dead. When police arrested her, Esther made a shocking claim. According to court testimony, she stated that Joseph Momfre was the Axeman. She said she had seen him fleeing from her home the night her husband was murdered. The New Orleans police investigated, and they discovered something interesting. Joseph Momfre had been in prison during the period when the Axeman attacks stopped, from late 1918 through early 1919. He was released just before the attacks resumed in March 1919. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence. Esther Pepitone was tried for murder. She never denied killing Momfre. In fact, she seemed proud of it. Historical court records show that she was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. She served only 3 before being released. Many people in New Orleans believed justice had been served. The Axeman attacks stopped after Momfre's death, which seemed to confirm Esther's claim. The police quietly closed the case. But was Joseph Momfre really the Axeman? Here's where the story gets complicated. Because while the official version says Esther Pepitone killed the Axeman, the evidence is far from conclusive. Modern criminologists who have studied the case point out significant problems with the Momfre theory. First, Esther's identification was questionable. She claimed she saw Momfre fleeing the scene, but other witnesses from that night never mentioned seeing her outside. Some investigators believe she was in another room when the attack occurred. Second, Joseph Momfre's criminal record showed he was a violent man, but his crimes were robberies and assaults, not the methodical, ritualistic style of the Axeman murders. Third, and perhaps most damning, the prison timeline doesn't perfectly match. Momfre was released in March 1919, true, but some researchers have found records suggesting he may have still been in custody during some of the earlier 1919 attacks. And then there's the letter, the famous jazz letter. Linguistic analysis of the letter suggests the writer was educated, theatrical, possibly someone familiar with literature. Joseph Momfre was barely literate according to police records. Some modern researchers believe Esther Pepitone killed the wrong man, that she was traumatized, desperate for justice, and perhaps saw Momfre near her home and convinced herself he was the killer. Others think Momfre might have been one of multiple killers, that the Axeman was actually several different people, some inspired by the newspaper coverage. After all, the methodology wasn't particularly complex. Chisel out a door panel. Use the victim's own axe. It could have been imitated. There's even a theory that the most famous attack, the one that generated all the publicity, was the only one actually committed by the Axeman, and that all the others were either unrelated crimes or copycats. We'll likely never know the truth. The physical evidence from 1918 to 19 is long gone. Most of the witnesses are dead. The crime scenes have been demolished or renovated beyond recognition. What we're left with is a mystery, a series of brutal attacks that terrorized a city, a letter that may or may not have been authentic, and a widow's revenge that may or may not have killed the actual perpetrator. But here's what we do know. The Axeman murders left an indelible mark on New Orleans. That night, March 19, 1919, when the entire city played jazz to ward off a killer, became part of New Orleans folklore. The night music saved a city. Some historians argue that the Axeman, intentionally or not, helped solidify jazz as the defining sound of New Orleans. Before 1919, jazz was largely confined to specific neighborhoods and communities. After the Axeman's letter, jazz belonged to everyone. Songs were written about the Axeman. The case remains officially unsolved. The truth is, we may never know who wielded that axe on those dark New Orleans nights. The Axeman case reminds us that not every mystery gets solved. Not every killer gets caught. Not every victim gets justice. But it also reminds us that communities can survive terror, that art and music can be acts of resistance. On certain nights in New Orleans, if you listen carefully, you can still hear jazz pouring from open windows, music filling the streets, the sound of a city that refused to let a killer define it. Maybe that's the real legacy of the Axeman. Not the fear he created, but the music that outlasted him. The attacks stopped. The killer disappeared. But the jazz played on. And it's still playing today. The Axeman of New Orleans remains one of America's most fascinating unsolved serial killer cases. What do you think? Was Joseph Momfre really the Axeman? Or did the real killer escape justice? And if you were in New Orleans that night, would you have played the jazz or dared to stay silent? Type jazz or silence in the comments right now.